In this entire bill, the key phrase false, misleading, or deceptive is not defined anywhere.
Dr. Julian Fidge is suing Pfizer and Moderna.
It's proven that this was a fabrication, was a lie.
This is why we can't have nice things. No, for once, this is not a rant about Daniel Andrews, although I can understand why you would think that. Nor am I complaining about drag queens, renewable energy, or the truly awful Baby Shark song, although I probably should. We can't have nice things because of stupid people on the internet. Yep, and given that the internet is chock-a-block full of stupid people, that pretty much ruins the chances of the human race for at least the next 50 years. What am I talking about? Well, for starters, I'm talking about Mr. Beast. Never heard of Mr. Beast? Lucky you, that must be a nice rock you've been hiding under. Can I join you? Mr. Beast is only the single biggest name in the entertainment industry in the world right now. Oh, you thought that was Tom Cruise and his latest crazy stunts from Mission Impossible? Impressive, yes, but not the biggest name in entertainment. You thought it was Christopher Nolan and his new epic Oppenheimer? Great movie, by the way. But no, not even this can take the place of Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast is a YouTuber. Yes, you heard that right. He makes YouTube videos. And right now, his YouTube channel has 172 million, yes, that's 172 with 6 zeros after it, subscribers. That means if Mr. Beast's YouTube channel were a country, it would have 6.5 times the population of Australia. Which, as an aside, is why I laughed when I found out that the Hollywood writers wanted to strike for better pay. Cool story, bro. You're all dinosaurs, you're working in a dying industry, and you're already being replaced by a new entertainment industry that crept up on you and shanked you from behind, led by none other than the lovable Mr. Beast. That's an aside. Now, getting back on track, I'll confess to having watched a lot more Mr. Beast videos in my life than I probably should have. I'll blame my 7-year-old son for that, but truth be told, Mr. Beast is actually really good at what he does, and I find myself getting sucked into his videos and wanting to watch more. Which is probably why he was offered $1 billion, yes, with a capital B, $1 billion for his YouTube channel. He could have been the world's first YouTube billionaire, but he turned it down because, he didn't feel like it. What does all this have to do with us not being able to have nice things, you ask? Fair question. Mr. Beast, real name James Donaldson, has done what most rich and successful people do. He became a philanthropist, giving money from his good fortune to those who are less fortunate than he. This has been the norm throughout history, by the way. Wealthy people throughout history have started homes for the poor, hospitals where anyone and everyone will get treated regardless of social standing, or even universities for the pursuit of knowledge for the benefit of all. Many such institutions still bear the name of the rich benefactor who made their existence financially possible. And Mr. Beast has, to his credit, followed in their footsteps, sharing his incredible success by starting a new sub-channel on YouTube dedicated to philanthropy, where he has over 15 million subscribers. Yep, his sub-channel has a population larger than New South Wales and Victoria combined. What does Mr. Beast do on his philanthropy channel? Well, philanthropy. He finds good causes and gives money away, a lot of money. For example, his latest video is about starting a private hospital to help those in medical need. Here's a clip.
It was when we saw this video online. Just like you are now, we were completely blown away by this transformation. So I sent Darren and Dan to Davao City in the Philippines to visit the Cure Hospital, which provided this life-changing surgery, and to find out how we can help provide hundreds of more to children born with similar conditions. When they arrived, Darren met with brother and sister, RJ and Sweetie, who were preparing for their next surgeries.
I'll put the link to watch that whole video on Mr. Beast's philanthropy channel in the description of this video. But again, you're asking, what does this have to do with my opening statement? This is why we can't have nice things. We're almost there, I promise. Half an hour after Mr. Beast launched that video, someone on Twitter came up with this hot take. I quote, "Honestly, Mr. Beast annoys me so much. Not only is this playing God, essentially just having fun with people less fortunate than you and doing as you please with them, but he's also discouraging the government from fixing the problem." Get that? Anything for views though, right? End quote. Now, normally, I don't think Twitter hot takes are news. That's a level of journalism that I normally leave to the professionals over at Q&A. But this time I'm going to make an exception because whilst this attention seeker got exactly what he wanted and has since tried to pretend that it was all a joke and he did it for the attention, ironic since he's the one who said anything for the views, right? The reality is that he's actually put his finger on something very, very important. He's identified one of the key reasons why we can't have nice things. He thinks that the private sector interfere in the important work of the government. He thinks that private action displacing government action is actually a bad thing. He recognises that healthcare providers do, to a certain extent, play God. But he's perfectly fine with that as long as it's the government playing God, not a philanthropist. He has it exactly backwards, but he's young, and honestly, I can see where he would get mixed up. We live in a world where the government really has been given the place of God in all of our lives. We live in a world where the government claim that everything is within their jurisdiction, that it can fix every problem. And by and large, the population believes that. Worse, we live in a world where the majority of people have accepted the lie that only the government can do certain things like welfare, healthcare, firefighting, and the list goes on. That is, to be clear, a lie. You don't have to go very far back in history to discover a time when the government was not involved in any such things. Hospitals were either private or religious, funded by benefactors or by the patients themselves. Homes for the poor, for orphans, for the insane were run as charities without government funding. Now, the lovers of government are quick to point out that the quality of the medical care was very poor compared to today. The living standards in those homes for the poor was very poor compared to today. Of course it was! It was 200 years ago and they barely understood the concept of germs, much less pain relief or antibiotics. Homes for the poor were crowded, dirty, dark, unhygienic. That was literally the whole of Europe 200 years ago. Don't be fooled by reruns of Pride and Prejudice. Very few people lived in these lavish estates, and those that did were often the very same people that funded those houses for the poor and the hospitals for the public. The vast majority of the population lived in conditions which today would be considered third world, but at the time they were the most advanced country on earth. This was a time when, in the most advanced country on earth, in the wealthiest country on earth, children mined coal underground for 12 hours a day to survive. Women worked their fingers to the bone at the docks gutting fish and brought that smell and mess home with them on their unwashed clothes, where labourers at the matchworks were dying in mysterious and gruesome ways with their teeth falling out because they were being poisoned by the very matches that they were manufacturing. That was the reality of the world in the richest country on earth at that time. And measured against the standards of the time, the hospitals and the charities for the poor that were provided by philanthropists actually were providing an acceptable and in some cases an exceptional service by the standards of their day. And as we learnt more and time passed and we developed new technology and became wealthier, the standards of those charities would have also risen with us. But that was never allowed to happen. You see, the government stepped in and they promised to make universal welfare, universal healthcare possible. Everyone will now be looked after by the government. And objectively, you can see that the quality of medical care has improved exponentially in the last 200 years. So government lovers claim victory, proof that we need the government to step in and provide universal healthcare for all because you don't want to go back to those bad, dark days where it was all charities and look at the terrible conditions that they lived in, right? But it's not the government funding model that made healthcare better. It was time with research, science and technology that made healthcare better. The government is simply claiming credit for what the private sector has done over the last 200 years. Even in the US, where they have a supposedly private healthcare system, the reality is that the government controls and regulates every single aspect of the entire industry. So it may not be government owned, it may not be government paid for, but it is certainly government controlled. And now for young people who've never known anything different, they think that's how it has to be. If the government didn't look after us, no one would. And in that world, you can start to understand how our attention-seeking mate here came up with his hot take. Mr. Beast is playing God and discouraging government from fixing the problem. If it wasn't so serious, it would be funny. The reality is there are people who actually think this way, and we need to challenge this line of thinking everywhere where it pops up. There's an observation attributed to Jeff Graham that goes like this. If children started school at 6 months old and their teachers gave them walking lessons, within a single generation people would come to believe that humans couldn't learn to walk without going to school. End quote. Of course, we know that's absurd. We teach kids to walk all the time, but you can see how it could happen that way. And with that in mind, can you see how we've accepted the assumption that the government must do all sorts of things that we in reality don't need them to do? Further, can you accept that the government might actually be doing a really bad job of many of these things? We just don't realise it because it's all we've ever known. The reality is that every time we beg the government to step in and to fix a problem, they only make it worse. And that is why we can't have nice things. Here's the news. Well, there's just a few short weeks left for you to put in a submission to the government regarding these proposed new misinformation, disinformation laws. I know we talk about it a lot here on the Aussie Wire, but honestly, this has to be, along with The Voice, probably those two are the two most significant things happening politically in this country right now. And if these laws are passed, it will be absolutely ruinous, probably for the Aussie Wire, but also for Australia. So you can submit a submission and tell the government what you think, but also there are actually some political parties and some politicians who are, and I can scarcely believe I'm about to say this, actually quite good at their jobs. Yes, amongst all the riffraff and all the rubbish that we call politicians in this country, there's actually some people that are pretty jolly good. And one of those parties is actually the one that those of you that have been following my work for a long time may remember I ran for. I ran for the Senate for them in Tasmania at the last federal election. And they were, and I say were deliberately, the Liberal Democratic Party. Now, American viewers and UK viewers, you might be confused. I thought he was a Libertarian. How come he's running for a party with Liberal or Democrat in the name? Relax. Those words have a very different meaning politically here in Australia to what they do in other parts of the world. The Liberal Democrats were, in fact, our most libertarian party here in Australia. But the Liberal Democrats have just recently done us all a favour and renamed themselves into, well, you know what? I'll let Jordan Dittloff drop the bombshell. Jordan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire. What have the Liberal Democratic Party renamed themselves to?
We are now the Libertarian Party. As much as you would hear from Anthony Green and many other pundits would like you to think that we enjoy being confused with the Liberal Party. If that was ever true, those days are long since gone. Yes,
I don't think that helped your party at the last federal election at all, if it has ever indeed helped at any point in history. So, Libertarian Party, and may I say, a credit to you, to the whole team. The branding looks absolutely sensational. The name is finally crystal clear, exactly what you guys are, and hopefully this is going to lead to even better and brighter days ahead. Not that the days up to this point have been bad. We're about to talk about some of your elected MPs and some of their great work. But we're not here to talk about branding. We are here to talk about this supposed misinformation, disinformation bill and the submission. So the Libertarian Party, as a party, you've been working on a submission to put into the government about this. What are your concerns and what are the sorts of things that you're saying to the government in your submission?
Yeah, well, as you flagged, we have two great state upper house members of parliament who are doing an awesome job. At the moment, we don't have federal representation, but that doesn't mean there aren't really, really important federal issues that libertarians should be concerned about. And I know from following your show that you and your viewers and listeners have been really concerned about this ACMA disinformation and misinformation bill, as anyone should be who values free speech. And I think there are a number of concerns. We have concerns with nearly all government legislation that government seeks to pass. We'd argue that very rarely is it ever warranted or appropriate that government legislate more to give themselves extra powers. But in particular with this bill, we see a really, really significant curtailing of freedom of speech.
Sure.
And I think in a way that it's not entirely clear from the voices that have been talking about this a lot, like Senator Babbitt, One Nation, and some others, it's not entirely being made clear the way it has been talked about so far, which is one of the reasons I'm really keen to talk to you and your audience about it today. Exactly how the government is seeking to achieve this is a lot sneakier and in many ways a lot worse than I think people imagine.
Okay. Well, look, so don't let me stop you there. Fill us in.
Yeah, so essentially what this bill does, or what it proposes to do, is it says, oh no, these platforms like Telegram and Rumble, they're providing a permissive approach to free speech. They're letting people say things that we don't want them to say or that are inconvenient or dangerous ideas. And basically they're providing this escape hatch, this exit parachute for people who have been censored on Facebook, YouTube, who want to say things that speak truth to power and represent a dissenting view. And the government is saying, we want to end that free market of ideas and free market of information. We want to impose on companies like Telegram, companies like Rumble, greater restrictions. First, we'd like them to censor themselves. That would be the government's first strong preference. The government would not only like to crush your freedoms, but they'd prefer to do so with as little effort and as much laziness as possible. So they'd like private companies to do the censoring on their behalf. And the benefit for the government is that also lets them breathlessly say, as they do in their preamble and guidance note, they say, this bill does not seek to curtail freedom of speech. We are not going to be removing content. And the reason they can say that with a straight face, not that they care about being honest, but they can say that because they are actually getting these third-party companies who are trying to do the right thing currently and protect freedom of speech to be complicit and carry the can in their crushing of fundamental human rights.
I think that's a really important point, because the way that we've seen this censorship working during the COVID era, in the absence of these new powers that they're seeking to get, the government themselves have been able to say a similar thing. Oh no, we haven't been removing the content. What we've been doing is drawing to the attention of these tech companies content that violates their guidelines. But of course, there's a very loaded relationship here where, for example, as Rukshan Fernando, the independent journalist, blew the whistle on recently, sensationally, we actually now have the documents proving that Facebook, Meta, were actually paying to places like RMIT Fact Lab. I believe it was up to $800 per fact check that they were providing. So Meta themselves were spending large amounts of money with, funnily enough, Australian government-funded institutions, becoming a business within those institutions. And they were doing so, of course, because the government had come to them and said, look, we're really concerned. We're very worried about all this misinformation. Could you possibly help us out and do something? And there's a piece of this puzzle that's missing in most people's minds. And Jordan, I know you know this, but I think it's important that we cover this. The single biggest client that a tech company has, or indeed the media have in terms of advertising revenue, is governments. Governments spend more money than anybody else getting messages out there, and they do it through advertising spend. The advertising spend that media companies depend on for their survival, that these tech companies depend on for their survival. So the government doesn't necessarily have to pay them in return for the censorship. They just have to lean on them and say, hey, we're really worried about this thing, hint, hint. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and then the private sector steps in and does the rest for them. It's deeply dishonest. And Jordan, from what you're saying, that dishonesty continues into this new proposed bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing people who criticise small government or libertarian ideas will often say is, well, isn't this what you want? You have this capitalism, this market, look at it functioning and functioning badly. And what they either don't see or would prefer to ignore is the fact that at every level and in almost every industry, but especially in the news media industry, you have this cabal, this sort of collusive corporatism, which is a fusion of state, that is government and corporations. Yeah. And it's this unholy alliance of all the worst things that the left should hate and profess to hate. And the right also profess to hate and say they love free markets, but nobody except libertarians in the middle seems to see that they're two heads of the same snake. Well, in this bill, you're right, that does continue. And exactly as you suggest, the most insidious thing about it is, in this entire bill, the key phrase false, misleading, or deceptive is not defined anywhere. So there's no definition within the bill for the crucial definition that opens up all of these extra regulatory enforcements, all of these penalties, all of these things that are being used to curtail freedom of speech. They're not defined in the Act. And ACMA says ACMA will not be determining what is true. And that begs the very obvious question that I'm sure you and all of your audience would be wondering, well, then who does determine what is true? And what it is they're essentially holding a loaded gun to the head of Telegram or Rumble or anyone foolish enough to try to preserve freedom of speech and say things that are the wrong things to say. And they're saying, look, we just want you to tell the truth. You know what that is.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit like the tax office comes along and says, you owe us money. Oh, how much do I owe you? Oh, you have to figure that out. Oh, you don't know how much I owe you? No. We know exactly how much you owe us. And if you give us the wrong amount, you go to prison. But we're not going to tell you. You have to figure that out. It's the same sort of a thing. And what that leads to, even if a social media company was simply trying to color within the lines and do the right thing, they would err extremely on the side of caution, because the powers, these fines can add up into the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, because at the worst case scenario, they're calculated as a percentage of global revenue.
Yes.
These could turn into some of the largest fines in human history. You would have to pay less money if someone died from negligence from your company than if you failed to remove some of this so-called misinformation. You used a turn of phrase earlier that I want to pick up on here, and you were talking about corporatism and sort of this merging in an operational sense, at least, if not in a legal sense, of corporations and governments, and how they're integrating their operations in with each other. Benito Mussolini, famously the father of fascism, defined fascism and in fact named fascism. The fascia was actually a type of strap used in Roman times for holding things together. And he literally defined fascism as the merger between corporates and government, the state and corporations coming together and integrating their operations. This is one of the things that fascinates me right now, is I get called a fascist quite regularly, laughably, if you actually know anything about what I believe and what I stand for. But people throw the word at me. And here I am, and along with you, standing up against the rise of literal actual fascism. And then we have the likes of Antifa, famously consider themselves to be anti-fascists, who are really quite excited about the idea that the government is going to be attacking people like me and removing content like what the Aussie Wire produces. How have we ended up with this inversion, where the anti-fascists are themselves more fascist than the people that they attack?
Well, it sounds like almost misinformation to me, doesn't it? But I mean, I have my grandparents migrated here just after World War II. My grandfather grew up in the Weimar Republic and survived the horrors of actual Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And the reality is that is never perpetuated by evil, badly intentioned people. One of your famous sayings, and the shirt you have that I have a copy of, I should have worn it tonight, that good people break bad laws.
Yeah.
The other side to that saying that very rarely gets talked about is that apathetic people write bad laws, and sometimes well-intentioned people write bad laws. Yeah. And so you have this idea here that somehow the world will be better off if only there were fewer sources of information that disagreed with the official narrative. But with respect to how this happens and how this inversion happens, you have all these perverse incentives. You have distortions that come into the marketplace when government becomes the biggest customer of a company or a corporation, when government becomes a competitor in a sector. Yeah. So one of the really important things we need to talk about here is what's not in this bill and who isn't covered, who is deemed to be a source of truth or quality news, and that is government departments, the ABC and SBS, which are government-funded competitors to people like you. And so your competitors, government-funded, are deemed to be truthful and containing good information, whereas your information is suspect. And finally, the mainstream news media also is covered by the excluded content definition in this bill. So in fact, three of the most collusive, most culpable, most disinformation,
the greatest sources of misinformation
on the wrong side of history, organizations, certainly in the last couple of years, but that's just repeating what has been the cycle for all of human history. So if you had to pick three groups of organizations, government-funded media, and mainstream legacy media, I don't think you could pick three with a worse track record for quality news.
Well, see, I would say it slightly differently. I would say government-funded media and commercial media, but I repeat myself because honestly, the commercial media is government-funded through that advertising revenue that we spoke of a moment ago. Look, this is an issue that is not going away anytime soon. I do have hope that we can win this fight. I was a part of the fight back against the News Media Council back in the days of Julia Gillard that was proposed, broadly a similar proposal, but the government was going to do their own dirty work rather than getting social media companies to do it for them. That's changed, but really nothing else much has. We won that fight. I'm optimistic we can win this one. Besides putting in a response, obviously, to this bill as a party, what are some of the other things that the Libertarian Party are doing or are gearing up for or are asking for help with in terms of helping to stop this bill from becoming law?
Well, I think absolutely the first thing that I would encourage anybody concerned about this issue who's watching this to do is to make a submission to the draft exposure bill.
I'll put the link to that in the description.
That has been extended until the 20th of August.
Yeah.
They have a habit of extending deadlines. They say, oh, we've received so many submissions, we want more. What they really mean is we've received certain opinions, we'd like different ones.
Yes.
And so that gives me great hope. And I think if we can continue to make our voices heard and make it clear the depth and expansiveness of how many different people in Australia fundamentally disagree with and reject what this bill is premised on, the better. We are in still a very early stage of play here. It should also be noted, and I don't want to let the opportunity escape me, to reiterate that this is a Scott Morrison Liberal Party government piece of legislation. Mm-hmm. This is their legislative agenda. Mm-hmm. The Labor Party have not made promises about this at the election. It's not a brainchild of Anthony Albanese. This is wholly and solely a Scott Morrison special that the Labor government is continuing to progress. It was in the pipeline already. And so I believe there is actually a lot to be gained by writing to your local MP if you live in a Labor electorate. By writing to crossbenchers. We don't have a representative yet in federal parliament. We will soon, I hope. But in the meantime, writing to people who are concerned about this issue or who realise that they might be vulnerable to a lot of angry constituents who are concerned about this issue. Yeah. And weirdly, and I get the sense this might not be said on your show that much, and I try not to say it where I can avoid it, but the Greens could actually do a significant amount of good here if they lived up to their theoretical concern for human rights and realised that things like the Iraq War, children overboard, Tampa, any number of things that the left have been the victim of government manipulation of information in the past. They must have very short memories if they think that this would never be used by someone they disagree with for a purpose they hate. Yeah. So if the left have any sense, which we know isn't always the case, but there has to be an argument for rational self-interest, right?
There are some good people there, and this is one of my bugbears: is never give to the government any kind of power that you wouldn't want in the hands of the politician you hate the most. Right? At the moment, it's people cheering for these laws because it's Anthony Albanese, and as you say, it didn't originate with the Labor Party, but people don't understand these things, and so they say, well, Anthony Albanese is the Prime Minister. I trust him. We should give the government these powers. Well, what if Peter Dutton is the next Prime Minister? Would you still want the government to have those powers? And people's attitudes change.
And if Scott Morrison had been re-elected and this legislation was being proposed now at the same time, you would see Antifa, you would see the Labor Party opposition, you would see everyone who's now saying this is a great idea, saying it's the work of the devil and Satan's spawn. Mm-hmm.
We cannot play politics as a partisan team sport. We have to be principles-based. That's one of the reasons why the Libertarian Party does continue to have my support, and I wish you all the very best with the rebrand heading towards new elections, possibly a double dissolution federal election coming up sometime soon. They're flirting
we can only hope they are that foolish. We can only hope.
They are flirting with it, and boy, I would be buying shares in popcorn companies immediately, because it's going to be some really good viewing if that does happen. Jordan Dittloff, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire from the Libertarian Party. Jordan, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
The Donald Trump Jr. speaking tour has been rescheduled. It's going ahead from the 25th to the 27th of September this year. Check the website trumplive.com.au, link in the description for all the details, and make sure you book your tickets because they are selling out very quickly. The Aussie Wire are proud sponsors of this tour. You'll see me there, and I hope to see you there too. Well, the federal government gave immunity to the mRNA vaccine manufacturers. In fact, not just the mRNA vaccine manufacturers, but any COVID-related vaccine manufacturer has been given immunity from any adverse events that may be caused by their products. Immunity which I suspect they'll be making very good use of in short order as the truth about these vaccines does continue to come out. But what's interesting is that they weren't necessarily able to think of every single contingency. They may not be covered for lawsuits that might originate based on, let's just say, some unexpected places. Rebekah Barnett, a wonderful journalist from Western Australia, joins me right now. Rebekah, welcome back to the Aussie Wire.
Thanks for having me.
You were such a popular guest and reporter here on the Aussie Wire. Everyone loved you, so we've actually made you a regular. You're going to be a regular face here on the Aussie Wire. I'm very happy to announce that. The story you bring me today is both baffling for me, confusing, well and truly above my kind of medical knowledge pay grade, so to speak, but also kind of thrilling. Can you just look, I'll get out of the way. Can you just tell us what in the world is going on and where has this lawsuit against Pfizer Moderna come from?
Sure, and we don't have to be scientific experts to understand the story, because the story is actually a court case. It all hinges on legal definitions. So a Victorian doctor and pharmacist called Dr. Julian Fidge is suing Pfizer and Moderna over alleged GMOs, genetically modified organisms, in the mRNA vaccines. So what he's saying, or what the case is saying, is that genetically modified organisms have to go through the Office of the Gene Technology Regulator and get the appropriate license in order to be sold and distributed in Australia. Pfizer and Moderna didn't do that for these products. Therefore, the case alleges that they're distributing the vaccines illegally in Australia because they don't hold the proper license for a GMO.
So that requires that these vaccines are themselves GMOs. What can you tell us about that side of this argument?
Yeah, so the case says that the two GMO components of these vaccines, one is the LNP, lipid nanoparticle synthetic mRNA complex, and there's decades of science now on those complexes that, as we got told repeatedly during the rollout, they're not a brand new thing. They have been being researched for some years. And so the case argues that the available evidence demonstrates that these things are GMOs. The second component, and perhaps the most sensational one, is the discovery of synthetic DNA contamination in the vaccines that's not supposed to be there. And it's over the legal or allowable limits. And so the case contends that that's a GMO component as well.
Yeah, wow. Like I said, I'm just gonna nod and smile. I'm not gonna pretend that I really have my head around liquid nanoparticles. It always amuses me when these moments in history come up and all of a sudden everyone's an expert on these words that they just heard in the media, 5 minutes ago. But you have spent time researching this, and obviously Dr. Julian Fidge knows what he's talking about and understands those definitions. It's a fascinating thought. What are the potential implications here? How serious of a court case could this be for the manufacturers?
Well, yeah, so there's two really serious aspects, I think. So I'll read you a quote from Julian Gillespie, who was legal counsel on the case. He said that by failing to apply for the appropriate licenses from the Office of the Gene Technology Regulator, Pfizer and Moderna avoided very serious risk assessment questions and processes that are necessary to determine the safety of these products. So if they are GMOs, if the court decides that it agrees that by definition they are, they've not been through the regulatory process that we need them to go through for products of this nature. So then the next aspect of that is, so what? And the so what is, and this is the instructing solicitor on the case. I'll read you what she said. Katie Ashby Coppins, she's a Sydney lawyer. She said, every single person who has been injected with these products has received a GMO that has not been through the expert regulatory process in this country. The human genome could be changed permanently and no one was informed.
Wow.
So, yeah, so just to, I guess I can give you just the bang, bang, bang kind of high-level picture of why they're saying that the human genome might be permanently altered. So if you go on the Australian government website today and you have a look at the COVID vaccine information, it says, do COVID vaccines change your DNA? And the answer is no, they don't. The mRNA does not enter the nucleus of the cell where the DNA is housed, and they can't integrate or interfere with your DNA in any way. And that's the official advice. And I think we've all heard that. So there are 3 studies that the case materials cite, amongst all the other materials cited, but the 3 main ones that you need to know about. Last year, there was an in vitro study, meaning in a lab dish. So this hasn't been demonstrated in a live human yet, but it has been demonstrated in a lab dish, that the mRNA vaccine was able to enter the human liver cell line and reverse transcribe into DNA, which is exactly what it's not supposed to do. Yeah. And it did that in human liver cells. So that was troubling. There was another study which has been cited, which showed the mRNA entering, the vaccine mRNA specifically, entering into the nucleus of the cells, which again, it's not supposed to do. And then another study that's referenced is one on mice that showed evidence of acquired immune traits being passed down to the offspring of the mice being studied. So that was suggestive that once inside the nucleus, the vaccine mRNA can be transferred and integrated with chromosomal DNA and then passed on to future generations.
That's
so
incredible.
It's definitely an area that requires further study. But the point that the legal team is making is that this is the study that should have been done before it gets approved.
Of course. And this has been the argument all along. These were rushed. I remember when we were told this was being expedited, we were just, we're not cutting any corners here. All of the tests are being done. We're just cutting out all of the regulatory backlog and all of the delays and I was skeptical of that from the first time I heard it, but of course at first you don't know for sure, and then as time goes on it's just become so painfully clear that the usual checks and balances were just not applied in the case of these vaccines. Do we have a timeline on this court case? Do we have any indication at this point of what sort of, this thing can drag on for years?
Yeah, we don't have a timeline. It's been filed. It was filed on the 6th of July, so just last month.
Okay.
But we don't know. I've contacted the government health department to ask if they've read the studies that are being cited, if they know about them. And if they do know about them, what are they intending to do about the advice that they have on the website? We know that Brendan Murphy, the previous secretary, was advised about, the Australian Medical Professional Society wrote to Brendan Murphy last year and expressed these specific concerns. They'd read the in vitro liver cell line study and included that in their references and voiced a range of concerns. And Brendan Murphy responded, no, he didn't reference the study. I'm not sure if he read it or not. It wasn't referenced at all, but he just said, no, these vaccines don't enter the nucleus of the cell and they can't alter DNA. So I followed up to ask if they're even aware of the study, if anyone read it, and what they're going to do about it. But I'm still waiting to hear back.
It's extraordinary that citizen journalists, people like yourself, people like Dr. Julian Fidge and so forth, are the ones that are actually having to really keep the pressure on and do what these regulatory bodies should have done in the first place. I find myself conflicted in this particular instance. I'm not a fan of regulation. I'm not a fan of the government requiring things to be ticked off and approved and so forth. I think there's far too much of that in life. But when it comes back to bite an organisation like Pfizer in the backside, these are companies, these pharmaceutical companies, they've paid the biggest criminal fines in history, the biggest criminal penalties in the entirety of the human history have been levelled against these companies, and they managed to wriggle out of responsibility for any adverse events for these vaccines. Hopefully they won't get off scot-free thanks to people like Dr. Julian Fidge. Well, Rebekah Barnett, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire with that story. We will keep up with this story as it develops, as things happen, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Well, bit by bit, piece by piece, we're watching the media change their tune. Just last week, we saw some new articles, some more media coverage of things like the cover-up of medical science, things like the misinformation that's been spread, things like this that were taboo. We couldn't talk about them not very long ago. So it's great to see it in the media, but I've got to be honest, I've got some very mixed feelings as I watch this coverage come out. I saw a tweet from someone by the name of Augusto Zimmerman, someone I've known for some years, but will be new to the Aussie Wire viewers. And his tweet really reflected my thoughts perfectly. And Augusto, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire. I wanted to get you on here because there would be a lot of people watching this coverage with very mixed feelings. On the one hand, fantastic, it's about time. Yay, we're seeing this coverage make it into the mainstream media now. But at the same time, if I can paraphrase a tourism ad from, I think, the Northern Territory from Queensland or something, where the bloody hell were you? Right? Where were they for those 2 years? It's frustrating, is it not, to see them breaking these stories that are at least 2 years old?
Exactly. I mean, this is old news now. Everybody knows the subject, knows what took place. But
Hmm.
what really amazes us is the fact that the media decided to now release an information that should have been released a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Even published articles, on the subject 2 years ago. Why on earth they weren't able to report it before?
Mm. Well, you released a fantastic blog post, what would have to be literally 2 years ago, maybe more by now. And when you go back and read that, you must feel an immense sense of pride that you were calling it. I mean, here you are, you're a professor of law, you're a very accomplished man, but you're not media. It wasn't your job to be across all of this information. And yet somehow you knew. How?
Well, look, I just needed to actually collect information from the right people. I would refer, for instance, to physics professor at the University of California, Berkeley, Professor Richard Miller, who was telling the whole world that he was highly suspicious of this lab having leaked the virus, released the problem to the whole world. And of course, I decided to write on the subject and I sent a couple of papers for publication together with Professor Gabriel Moyes to the Australian newspaper. These papers were totally rejected. So they actually had the information available and they refused to publish it. I don't know why. Or perhaps I know, but
Yeah.
we know the reasons. Huh?
If we say why, we get pulled off the air because unfortunately the censorship hasn't stopped. This is the article This is the article that you were tweeting about last week. This is the front page of the Weekend Australian, and the headline there says "COVID cover-up: How Science Was Silenced." Now, the contrast here between what was this very same masthead and journalists all over Australia telling us trust the science. And people like you and people like me saying, but the real scientists are being silenced. In my case, it was Professor John Ioannidis and the work that he was doing on the likely infection fatality rate for COVID-19 and how that differed from the case fatality rate and the methods that he was using. Professor John Ioannidis, the most cited medical scientist on planet Earth, but he wasn't allowed to speak in the media. And now we're being told, the science was silenced. How's that for a turnaround?
It's amazing. And Professor Ioannidis made the point very clearly that the death rate for the virus was not so impressive as some people initially expected. The estimations of the World Health Organization is that about 1% of the population could die of the virus. And it's proven that this was a fabrication, was a lie. And Professor Ioannidis was referring to this from the very beginning. I think his first comment on the subject was made in January or February 2020. So from the very beginning, he was correct. And I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, an open letter that was published in Quadrant magazine, trying to explain that he should exercise moderation and that the measures to be adopted should be taken very carefully. And everything I have suggested, recommended, was completely disregarded by the former Prime Minister.
Well, in March of 2020, bolstered in part by the work of Professor John Ioannidis, I released a video in which I volunteered to be infected with the coronavirus. Now, people accused me of just, shock tactics, what have you, but no, I understood the numbers. I understood the data. And I recognized that for someone like myself at the time, late 30s, relatively good health, no comorbidities, this virus represented a negligible risk. I calculated my personal risk to being approximately the same as if I jumped in a car and drove to Brisbane and back again. That was approximately my risk of death with my particular profile based on the data that we had at the time. But if you talked about data, you were immediately questioned. What are your credentials? You're not an epidemiologist. And the fact that you were quoting epidemiologists didn't seem to matter. If you quoted, on the other hand, this guy, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we now know lied through his teeth, well then, of course, you could do that. You could say that on social media. What role has censorship played, and how much culpability do you think the censors have for just how badly impacted we were by the reaction to COVID?
Well, look, you know very well that the World Health Organization was demanding of some social media outlets the removal of some information. And of course, the Morrison government was also quite behind this whole thing. By now, the information provided, I think, as a result of a Freedom of Information release requested by, if I'm not wrong, Senator Alex Ante.
I believe so. Yep.
Proving that the government was censoring those who had opinions to the contrary, or dissenting voices that were trying to alert the community about the fact that the vaccines could potentially offer a health issue. And now we know that they were completely right. And you're seeing the results via the dramatic increase in the death rates after the experiment was introduced.
Look, the data is becoming tragically unequivocal. West Australia, your home state, has provided us with some excellent data. I discussed that with the journalist Rebekah Barnett just the other week, where we have seen, and in fact, according to the WA official data, so fact checkers, you can fact check me on this, it's true, the COVID vaccines have endured a 23.8-fold increase in reported adverse events. Some people try and dismiss that, say it's just an increase in reporting. I'm very skeptical of that reaction. It seems like the toll of the bad choices we've made, Augusto, is going to be with us for quite a long time.
Yeah, indeed. And we know very well that Anthony Fauci was trying to suppress the information because his institute was actually sponsoring the lab. And as soon as the problem was told and the whole world got to know what was happening, Anthony Fauci was on a rampage, basically trying to suppress this information in collusion with the World Health Organization. That's now in the process even of creating emergency powers at global level. So there is a discussion now taking place that the current Director General of the World Health Organization would have the power to decree emergency lockdowns and health policies to be obeyed or to be followed by every single member state of this organization. That would be the end of the world, as you know.
It's absolute madness to hand that kind of power to unelected people halfway around the world. But I want to come back to the media, because really this is what's really got my goat at the moment. The media now changing their tune, but not actually acknowledging how badly they got it wrong and how much they contributed to this problem. The mainstream media, the dinosaur media, especially the government-funded media. But then again, all media is government-funded because they depend on the government for advertising revenue.
Yeah.
Augusto, thank you so much for coming on to independent media, those of us that have been telling the truth all the way through. And look, we actually haven't even touched on your actual specialty, which is law. You were the president of the Law Reform Commission in West Australia for a while there. I'm sure there will be many more things for us to talk about going forward. I look forward to seeing you in Perth at the Church and State Conference, which is coming up very, very soon. So I'm sure we'll have a lot more to do with each other. But for today, that'll have to do. And thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you very much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you for watching the Aussie Wire News. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com and be sure to sign up for our email newsletter so we can keep in touch even if we're pulled off social media. Follow our socials via @TheAussieWire, and please consider supporting us by becoming an insider. Insiders get giveaways, discounts, exclusive content, and our insiders community. And in the process, our insiders also help to fund our work and keep us on the air. Click the link in the description and become an insider today. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.